Now we're transitioning to our next amazing speaker, giving a talk on PR for PR, how proportional representation can save our democracy. I'm excited to introduce another IMD fellow, Gabby Mackiewicz.
Hello. Hi. So today I'm going to be talking to you about proportional representation. So what's the issue? As Leah talked about, as we just heard, there's lots of issues with plurality. Plurality, the candidate who gets the most votes wins. Seems nice, not nice, as Leah described. Because it doesn't always accurately reflect the opinions of voters. This goes hand in hand with our first past the post voting system, where there's only one winner per district. And those single member districts are generally really unfair because of plurality. So while Leah talked about presidential elections a lot, we're going to be switching gears a little bit. We're looking solely at congressional elections and other legislative elections. So there's many different types of proportional representation, or PR, but in general, it refers to, switching gears, sorry. So we're gonna look at some examples of this unfairness of plurality in our single member districts. So up here we have a map of Massachusetts, and as we can see, every single one of the 9 congressional districts are held by a Democrat. That is an issue because 30% of the state is Republican. So those Republican voters don't have any representation in Congress. And we see the opposite happening in Oklahoma. They have 5 congressional districts, and all of them are held by Republicans, despite the fact that 30% of the state is Democrat. So those 30% of Massachusetts Republicans and 30% Oklahoma Democrats, none of them are represented in Congress. So that's an issue. And what can we do instead? Well, here's where we come to proportional representation, and more specifically, multi-member districts. So with multi-member districts, because you would have larger districts that have multiple winners, so instead of just one, it's easier for candidates to get elected because the threshold, the number of votes that you need, is lower. So it really opens up for a lot more wide range of candidates to run and actually have a chance of getting elected. Have more niche platforms run. Things maybe you want to run solely for abortion rights or on a platform for climate change advocacy. Or you can also have more third-party candidates. The Green Party might actually have a chance because, as Leah discussed, as of now, if you were to run on a campaign like that now, it would kind of be pointless because we have these 2 major parties that kind of control everything. So we have a lot of different forms of PR, but the main idea is that the number of seats a party wins is proportional to the number of votes it receives in congressional elections. So a little example for you, if we had 3 parties running, you might have party A. If they win 30% of the votes, then they get 30% of the seats. If party B has 25% of the votes, they get 25% of the seats. C, 45% of the votes, 45% of the seats. Makes sense. That makes sense. So going back to Massachusetts, for example, we have our 9 districts. So with this, for example, we can instead have 3 larger districts and then have 3 winners in each district. And hopefully that should make it easier for those for Massachusetts Republicans who currently have no representation to actually win and get some representation that is more proportional to the number of Republicans in Massachusetts. And, most democracies in the world use PR. There is a historical basis for this. As you've seen the world map, every country that is in orange uses some form of PR for some of their elections. So if it's so great, why don't we use proportional representation? Well, there are some technical issues that you can run into. One, if districts are too big, then there's too many people that the representatives are trying to represent, and they can't adequately represent the people. On the other hand, if districts are too small and you have too few winners from each district, the entry bar to win is too high. And you kind of run into like similar problems as you do with plurality and single member districts. There's also some more political reasons that we don't political problems you can run into in certain forms of PR. They, instead of using primaries to pick candidates, the party itself just picks the candidates, and as you can imagine, that gets complicated and messy. And then also, there is the fact that we have two powerful parties in the US currently, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and they benefit greatly from our two-party system, and switching to PR would mean that they have less power, and they don't want to lose that power. So they don't really have incentive to want to change the current two-party system. And further with that, PR tends to hurt incumbents. Currently, as we know, politicians' main concern, maybe not main concern, but big concern, is getting reelected. So that means kind of, there are all issues with that. But with PR, because of that lower threshold and more wide array of candidates and parties that can be elected, while it's also easier to win, it's just as easy to lose. And incumbents have a higher chance of losing their seats, which they don't want. So they wouldn't have as much incentive to want to move to PR. And there's also legislative hurdles. The Uniform Congressional District Act of 1967 mandated single-member districts to be used in congressional elections. So actually implementing multi-member districts and PR in the US would require a bill to be passed. But we can do that. So while there are disadvantages, as we saw, to PR, there is also plenty of advantages that we'll get into now. One, it limits partisanship. So as we know currently, there are plenty, as like in Massachusetts with the 30% Republicans who don't have representation, and Oklahoma with the Democrats. There are plenty of places across the United States where the state and districts are solidly red or solidly blue, and their elections really aren't contested. So that means voters in those districts who support the minority party, their vote kind of doesn't matter. And so with PR, because you have those bigger districts with the multiple winners, more elections can go contested and actually have a chance of, flipping the parties. And you can have districts that aren't just one color. You can have purple districts where we get maybe 2 Democrats and a Republican in one district or something like that, where it's not all from one party. And with that, with the lower threshold to win, we have the potential to eliminate the two-party system, which is so fun. It's easier for smaller parties to win seats with PR, and so that means that the total parties represented can really be diversified, and we can end up with something more like this, with many different colors in our congressional makeup instead of the solidly red and blue like in the last slide. And going back to Leah's presentation as well, PR also limits negative campaigning and has more coalition building. So because there are multiple winners from each district, the people you're running against, you have a chance of working with them in the future. So you have less incentive to bash them on the campaign trail if you're going to be working with them a few months down the line. And so it also has more coalition building because of the smaller parties and more niche platforms that can be run. So you get a much wider array of ideas and people in Congress, and you don't have this strict, all the Democrats work with other Democrats and all the Republicans work with other Republicans, and the less polarization and more working together. And representatives are also held more accountable. Currently, it's kind of a candidate can run with big, lofty ideas in their platform, and then they can get elected and throw it all away and never come back to their campaign promises. And that's just kind of fine. We live with that. But with PR, because it's so easy to get elected and also lose your seat, candidates have more incentive to stick to their promises and actually do what they say they're going to do. Further, with proportional representation, your vote actually really matters. Is even if you don't favor the majority candidate. So even if your candidate that you support doesn't get the most votes, doesn't mean that they don't still have a chance of winning. Further, PR lessens the divide between rural and urban voters. So currently, Republicans tend to be more in less populated districts and more spread out in rural areas, and Democrats tend to be in more densely populated districts and urban areas. So this means that Republicans have more chances to win like larger districts that are less populated. But with PR, where you're from, what the size of your district not the size of your district, but the population density of your district doesn't actually matter, and all votes are treated equally. It also limits gerrymandering. I won't get too much into the details because Janaki will be talking about gerrymandering next. But because of the bigger districts with multiple winners, PR would make it a lot harder for district lines to be redrawn in a way that favors one party over another. And the next point, which I think is most important, is that PR allows for a wide and more diverse range of people and ideas that can feasibly win. More women, more people of color, and other members of marginalized groups have a better chance of being elected. And as we'll see in a bit, there's statistics to prove that. And overall, PR actually is shown to boost voter participation because of things like limiting negative campaigning and elected officials being held more accountable. People feel more inclined to actually want to participate in our democracy. And that also goes hand in hand with the more diverse representation in Congress, because people want to see people like them elected. So some cool statistics for us, if it will go. Under PR, studies have shown that women are 2 times more likely to be elected. Black representatives are 25% more likely to be elected, 25% more Black representatives are elected, and 40% more Latinx representatives are elected. So it's shown that when elected officials from marginalized groups are in Congress, they act in the interests of their marginalized group. And so to have that representation in Congress is really great for making sure that everyone in the US is adequately represented. So now we're going to go into a little bit of how it works election-wise. So one method for PR is single transferable vote. It is a form of instant runoff, remember from Leah's presentation, except it's more generalized to fit multiple candidates, or the multiple winners, sorry. And it relies on a win threshold or win quota. So based on the number of people who voted and the numbers of seats to be elected, to be won, there is a quota figured out that each candidate has to pass in order to win. So let's see. So let's say we have a ballot that looks like this. We have 5 candidates: plum, rust, apricot, violet, and lavender. And single transferable vote, like instant runoff, which it comes from, is a ranked choice voting system. So voters would rank their candidates, and we're trying to, in this example, elect 3 winners. We have 3 seats to fill. So people vote, people rank their people, and let's say we have something like this. So here we see with the number of votes we have and the number of seats to be filled, our win threshold is 25%. So that means that after a candidate reaches 25% of the votes, they win. They win a seat. And then, like instant runoff, they are taken out of the election. And then with the remaining votes over the win threshold, we take those votes and then we split them up proportionally among the remaining candidates. So we see Plum has over 25%. They have 35% of the vote. Just looking at first choices. So that means Plum is a winner. And then that extra chunk of votes above 25% are going to be distributed proportionally to the rest of the candidates. So let's see what that looks like. We get this. So now we see that Rust has also reached 25% of the votes. So that means that Rust is also a winner. Yay. But here we run into a little bit of a problem. Rust has exactly 25%. They didn't go over the win threshold. They reached it, so they won, but they didn't go over, so there's no excess votes to be redistributed. So what do we do now? Well, we can see Lavender has the least amount of votes, only 12%. So since they're the lowest, just like an instant runoff, we can drop them and then take their votes and then redistribute them based on the other rankings for the other 2 candidates. And then we'll end up with something like this. So now we see our final winner is Violet. After moving all of Lavender's votes, the Violet reaches 30%. That is over the win threshold. So Violet is our final winner. That means with this example, you have Plum, Rust, and Violet that are elected. So that was a fun example, but it's very hypothetical. A single transferable vote is actually used right nearby in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So Cambridge City Council elections and also their school board elections use STV, and they're actually voting today for City Council. And so people of Cambridge will go to a voting booth and see something like this. And I'll admit, looks kind of daunting. There's a lot of people, a lot of bubbles. They're filling 9 seats, so you have a lot of people running to fill those 9 seats. But we'll say, like Leah said, you're under no obligation with ranked choice voting systems to rank every single candidate. You can rank as many or as few as you want. And all of that work we did in the previous slides, where you move them all around, is all done by a computer. So it'll be done. Not to worry. So the way that they find their candidates, the quota for who wins, is they look at the number of valid ballots or the number of voters over the number of people to be elected. So that's like the number of seats that are up. So number of seats plus 1, and then all of that plus 1 will give you the quota. And so once candidates have that many votes, then they win. This is actually called the Droop quota, which is the most common one used. And a great thing about it is that it's impossible for using this quota to end up with more than 9 winners, or more winners than you have seats for in general. So Cambridge has been using STV for a long time. This map is from 2017, the city council election then. As we can see, the map shows all of the winners, and it has a little house for where they live, and then corresponding colors of where their votes came from. And as we can see, we have this natural neighborhood effect, where the supporters for each winner come from the people who live around them, for the most part. And this really shows just how much proportional representation goes for actually electing people who truly represent their constituents. This is literally people in their direct communities who elected them. And this has really worked for Cambridge, and I believe it can work for plenty of other places too. They've been using it since 1941, I believe, for their municipal elections, and since they've seen much better increase in Black people elected, more women elected than other systems. So it's really beneficial and a really great way to have a much more fair and representative elected. So thank you so much. That's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions?
So for the multi-member districts, is that to elect the dual representatives, is that like the district is split up into 2 smaller districts and a separate election is run in each, or is it like one just single election for the entire district, and like the first place and the second place winners become the representatives?
The second one. So you'll have one election, and then from that election you'll have multiple winners. So say you're electing 3 people, everyone votes, you vote for one person, and then from that you'll get the top 3 kind of, and then you have 3 winners all from that same voting pool.
And then in that situation, if ranked choice voting was used in those dual elections, would it be less effective or more effective?
More effective. Ranked choice voting is basically like, to move it, that's basically the single transferable vote example I showed. That's single transferable vote is like the generalization of ranked choice voting for multi-member elections, multi-winner elections, sorry. So it still works.
Thank you so much, you're good. I was wondering if you could give some more clarity on how seats would be divided if the winning percentage is a decimal, as in like if 50.9% of the party wins and then 49.1%. Like, does that like make sense?
I think I get what you're saying. So I mean, unless you have 100 people in the district, then like 50% isn't always going to be 50 people or an exact number of people anyway. So it's always, no matter how you do it, it's always going to be slightly off from the number of people. But it doesn't really matter if you have decimals. It's perfectly fine.
I'm kind of thinking, what happens when the representatives are making a decision for the district? If there's 3 representatives of the same district, like, do they come up with a consensus? Does one kind of take the lead if they have like the most of the proportion? Like, what happens there?
Since we're looking at congressional elections, I mean, a lot of it isn't like super specific to your actual like district. Of course, you want to work, if you're an elected official, you want to work in the best interest of your constituents. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing stuff like for your actual district. That would be other elections. So all these people just kind of work independently, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Huge round of applause.